Morning.
Good morning.
I call to order the February 2023 meeting of the Governance and Policy Committee. Good morning, everyone, and thank you to those of us who are joining us here in the boardroom, but also those who are joining via live stream video. Our first item today to act on potential enhancements to the board public engagement. To outline these changes since our review in December, our Executive Director Steves and Ms. Krista Overby, Communications and Engagement Manager. So Executive Director Steves, would you like to start us off?
Madam Chair and members of the committee, we're genuinely delighted to be able to bring before you for action the proposal that we have been talking about and developing together actually for the past several months related to a public comment portal. And as we just revisit the conversations that we've had, I'll just remind you that we've had discussion about the constellation of ways that this board engages with the public and gathers input and also makes its business transparent to the public. I think we've got a slide that just reflects that and talks about some of the ways through open meetings, shared governance, some of the forums that you do, campus visits, and all of those things, all of which really demonstrate the commitment that this board has made to being accountable to the public, to the university community, to faculty, staff, students, and others. As we've been talking about this pilot, what it does is, as we move to the next slide, we maintain all of those things that this board has been doing over a period of time, but then we add another element to it, and that is this robust public comment portal, which we've talked about as being an opportunity for any time, anywhere, and in many ways, kind of any format comments, which is something, again, that from our research is not something that other boards are doing, certainly not in higher ed. Maybe some other boards or public entities elsewhere are doing things that are similar, but this really will be an opportunity for this board to innovate, and we think and hope, and part of the reason we're doing the pilot is to determine whether this will be something that really resonates with the university community and becomes an avenue for them to share their thoughts more directly with the board. And that's the third element of the pilot, is that we will develop and launch this and then evaluate it across time and make modifications to it and learn from it. Really the goal here is to learn from it and continue to adapt and ensure that this commitment to accountability that the board has continues to be enhanced. So with that, Ms. Overby is going to talk a little bit, I was going to talk a little bit about the guiding principles. As we've talked about in the past, we have been guided by several principles in developing the pilot. First and foremost, to support the board in building trust and demonstrating that accountability that we've talked about, recognizing that public engagement practices evolve over time, that it's really always a custom fit, and that the public engagement practices that we have now and adopt now may not be what was the right fit 10 years ago. And so we have to continue to evolve across time. And finally, that we have an opportunity to leverage technology to aid in advancing this work and being more innovative than we have in the past. And with that, Ms. Overby is going to talk a little bit about the changes and modifications that have been made to reflect committee feedback.
Chair Verhalen and members of the committee, since we met last to discuss the pilot program in December, several modifications have been incorporated to reflect committee feedback. First, the draft portal guidelines have been developed in consultation with the U of M Office of General Counsel. Second, the pilot has added language to clarify that all content will be made available to regents and that non-public information will not be included in the docket materials. Third, we've added that commenters will have the opportunity to select from an evolving set of categories. And these categories will be fluid and will encompass areas more than those that are on the board's agenda. These categories would also be used to organize comments into the docket materials. And finally, we've added clarification that the rollout of the pilot program will include a robust communication plan. to ensure that members of the public are aware of the board's new feature. Now I'd like to share a little bit more about the public comment guidelines that will be provided to the commenters in advance of accessing the portal. The guidelines are categorized into 4 areas. 1, comment format that specifies the length and formats available for comment. 2, standards for comments, and that the board may refuse to publish comments that include private or non-public information. And 3, use of comments in that commenters will acknowledge that their remarks, their name and their affiliation will be publicly available in the board's docket materials and archived into perpetuity. And 4, the timeline for submission, that the portal will be available at all times with a specified window for comments to be included in each regularly scheduled board meeting's docket. And then finally, I'd like to remind you of the timeline for this pilot program. If approved today, assembling a project team would begin. Then development and testing would take place in the coming months. The portal would launch in September 2023. And then the portal would be active for 5 regular meetings. And in spring 2024, we would evaluate this pilot and share for discussion at a spring 2024 board meeting. And after that discussion, the future of the public comment pilot could be made. And with that, I'll turn it back to Chair Verhalen. We'd be happy to take any questions, but I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Ms. Overby and Executive Director Steves. As regents get in line to ask questions or make comments, just a couple of thoughts. First of all, thank you to the staff for what I know has been a lot of work in putting this together. We as a board brought you an idea, and you actually put pen to paper and did a lot of research and had a lot of conversations and really dug in on what we could do and how we could make this something interesting and exciting and new for us. I really appreciate the thoughtfulness on communicating this to our university community, stakeholders, et cetera. I think we will need to continue to monitor that and make sure people are hearing about it in different ways. It's not enough to just say there's a link on the website. We need to actually communicate that said link exists and that people can go find it and participate and interact with us that way. But also to this board and those that are sitting around here and those who will be joining us, it will be necessary for us to hold each other accountable as we move this forward. We will be interacting in a different way, receiving information in a new way, and making sure we're acknowledging that information, but also acknowledging this is new for us and what modifications do we need along the way? What do we need to be thinking about as we go forward, not just waiting until spring, but really having those conversations as we go forward, whether it's here in Gov and Policy or during our retreat check-ins, et cetera. I think that will be really important to think through and talk about. Regent Powell, you are first on my list.
Ooh. Okay. Well, thank you.
How's that for a transition?
Smooth. Caught by surprise. So thank you, Chair Verhalen. I have a couple of questions for Ms. Overby. I just want to make sure actually I understand some of the technical aspects. So just to remind us all of the formats that will be included. I think it's email, there'll be a video option, voicemail, but I want to make sure I understand all the different formats. And then just to also make sure, what I thought I heard you say is that that there will be, that submissions will be gathered and organized by content, which will be changing over time, but we'll know. But so just as an example, say I'm interested in, comments on our recent discussions on namings policy. So there'd be a file there, and I could go to that, and I could see everything that was submitted in one place.
Ms. Overby.
Yep. Chair Verhalen, Regent Powell. Yes, the form will allow for written, video, and audio file submission with specified lengths So there's like a character limit for written and a time limit for video or audio submissions. And then the revolving set of categories could include like tuition, budget, public safety as examples. And then we could add in as the situations evolve and as different areas become important and we see comment trends, then we'll use those filters to categorize them so that when you're reviewing the docket materials, it's a bit more organized instead of a whole bunch of comments in an unorganized fashion. Does that answer your question?
It does. I really appreciate this initiative. I think it's very, very positive. Thank you.
And before I move on to the next question, or just tailing on to what Regent Powell asked, just to reemphasize this, every comment that's submitted, we as regents will have access to no matter what. And will those be tagged as well for different categories, or will we decide as we go along how best to sort those out? Ms. Overby?
Yes, all comments will be, or Chair Verhalen, all comments will be available to the regents. And as part of the docket preparation process, board staff will review the comments for any non-public information, and those we could develop a process to flag so that regents are aware that they're not in the public-facing docket, but that's to be determined as the pilot evolves.
Great. Thank you. Regent Farnsworth?
Thank you, Chair Verhalen, and thank you for the presentation. As I think folks know, this is a very important topic to me.
Sorry, Regent Farnsworth. As a former parliamentarian of a governing body, I realized I forgot to ask for a motion.
Oh, please, go ahead.
So is there a motion to approve recommend approval to direct the Office of the Board of Regents to implement the proposed public comment portal pilot program? Wow.
Say that 3 times.
Proposed public comment portal pilot program as presented.
So moved.
Second.
I will make that motion, Madam Chair.
I had a motion and a second over here, but thank you, Regent Powell, for offering. My apologies, Regent Farnsworth, thank you.
No, it's okay. I was actually the parliamentarian here too for undergrad student government, and I wasn't tracking that. So my apologies. It was the worst appointment I ever had. But anyways, so let me reel back from those memories. So as I think everyone knows, this public comment and public engagement is a really important topic to me, and it started, from my own journey with bringing the resolution forward back in May or whenever that was, and here we are discussing this public comment portal pilot program. So I got a couple questions just to do a little kind of along the lines of Regent Powell, just to clean up a little bit of my understanding on some specific points. And I also had done some engagement to folks that have engaged with me on this public comment, this proposal in general, just to see what other groups in the university think about this, because I think that's important as we do this. And so there was a question about, in the standards for comments section, it states that comments, quote, that are unrelated to the university may not be published. How and who is making that determination? Is one question.
Executive Director Steves?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that would be part of the OBR review as we're looking for non-public information. It is, I want to reassure you, so our standard is always opting that they'll be in, and the bar for them being out is very high. The reason we put that in there is just, I guess, to have some kind of a guard or some kind of a guideline to say it has to relate to the university in some fashion. And we didn't think it's actually very, very difficult for a commenter to relate it to the university in some way, to make the connection. And so that was the gist of that language in there.
So before I hand it back, if someone's cat sits on their MacBook and turns on the video recording, we as regents will still get that recording, but it may not be in the docket.
That's correct.
Got it. I think, yeah, that distinction is important. I understand why some folks may see that as more subjective language. And so I've been really trying to make sure this is clear. A second question, this was also flagged a few times, and I think we as a board, perhaps have a much better understanding than the general public about the whole issue of non-public information. So there was a question about, what is considered non-public information, and at what point, if any, does that become public? In terms of, how does these public comments maybe relate to the DPA? And maybe a little bit more clarity on that, I think, for folks would be helpful. So that's another question. I could keep going just with a few more. I think the question was answered about the categories just in the last exchange, so that, that commenters will have the opportunity to categorize their comments using an evolving set of categories. And then will there be a category listed as other, and then a chance for someone to fill in the blank or self-categorize? I think that's important. And then two last questions. Back under standards for comment, so quote, the board will refuse publication of comments that contain private data or raise a specific personnel matter or unrelated to the university. So there was a question from students. One, does that mean that students can't share their names or income status or other types of anecdotal information that might be considered private? Or there's a question about whether that would be private, but highly relevant to the nature and purpose of their comment. For example, if a student is talking about the impact of a tuition increase or something, and they might share that kind of data, self-select. And then two, does this mean public comments can't make complaints or concerns about members of the university community? For example, if a member of the board has done something publicly and people are making comments about that. Those were two examples that someone sent in, and I think those are good questions. So maybe I'll stop there, and then I'll ask my last topic after this.
Executive Director Steves.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, I'll try to hit all of the questions you've asked. So first, with regard to non-public data, that is defined under state statute. And so we will be working closely with the Office of the General Counsel to ensure that we are only filtering out those things that would typically be filtered out, say if a DPA request were submitted for information and the university were going to be releasing that, they would redact certain pieces of information. That's the same kind of thing that we would be looking for. And so we're saying this all in a theoretical sense because we haven't yet done it, but that is our intention. That's how we intend to approach it. You cite the example of a student sharing information about themselves in the comment portal. That they have access to share their own data. They can share their own story. It's a matter if a faculty member wanted to comment and share details about a student, that would be problematic. We wouldn't be able to have that kind of data or information released, as an example. If you said an example of if someone wants to make a comment about a regent, my understanding is, and we would consult with OGC on this, my understanding is that would be okay, that they could comment about their impression of or their reaction to something that a board member said or did. But that where it gets into more complicated territory, again, my understanding based on our initial conversations with OGC is, say that there's an allegation of harassment or something that one person is making against another member of the university community. That's where we get into complicated territory, and we may not, have that be pushed out into the public docket. But again, all regents would have access to it. We will have to be careful about how we do this, and our intent is to work very closely with the General Counsel's office to ensure that we're hitting the right mark.
To that, when commenters submit their information, though, we will be asking them for certain information, name, phone number, email address. So if an example like what you just lastly provided does occur, we will be able to follow up with that individual and get them connected with the right resources within the university as well.
Madam Chair, that's correct. We're following the standard that often like newspapers follow, where they will take a letter to the editor as an example, but they'll want a phone number because they want to be able to contact you to either verify that it's you or that you submitted the letter. But in this case also, that if someone is submitting something, we can connect them with the right resources if that situation appears to be needed.
The other question Regent Farnsworth asked about was whether people, when selecting the other category, would be able to enter some self-tagging options on how that may get sorted or collated with the additional materials.
Madam Chair and Regent Farnsworth, we definitely plan to have an other category because as we all have learned, I think, across time, issues emerge and all of a sudden there's a new topic that we haven't yet maybe categorized or had there. And so we will certainly have an other category, but we also intend that as issues emerge and we start to see traffic on them, we'll just add a new category so that we can start to capture it in real time. So our intent is that these categories can be fairly dynamic across time and evolve.
And as we go forward, specifically as it relates to those comments that end up being available to regents but not available publicly, we will continue a dialogue on whether comments are getting over-filtered. I mean, the upside is we as regents are going to see them all, no matter what. But then talking about whether certain information we need to have a deeper conversation about whether this category of information does get moved to the public availability of these. Regent Farnsworth, I'm sorry, you said you had one last item.
Madam Chair, if I could just clarify on that too. As we moved from the review stage to the action stage today, we've had some additional conversations with the General Counsel's office. And what I would say is our inclination initially was to maybe be more ready to filter out some comments. In consultation with the General Counsel's office, really, I think that we will filter out very, very few. It will only be non-public information or the situations that we've just been talking about. So I think that number will be very, very small.
Thank you.
Chair Verhalen, Executive Director Steves, thank you for that explanation. I think perhaps it would be helpful on the portal maybe to have a link to a succinct and maybe more external resource about the non-public data piece for folks to look at. I think that's probably an evolving area of understanding for the general public, and so there seem to be enough questions where it might make sense to have that on the portal. And then I forgot the other part. Anyways, I'll go to the last thing, which was the timeline for submission. So it says the public comment portal will be available at all times. Comments captured by 12 p.m. on the Friday before our regularly scheduled meeting will be included in the docket materials for the following week. One, I had kind of a question about how that relates to sometimes a supplemental docket release we have on Tuesdays. And then there was a question, are comments intended to relate to previous items the board has considered? Or, and then trying to get an understanding of how long the period is between the public release of the board agenda and capturing comments. And just if you could provide a little clarity on some of those timeline pieces, I would appreciate that.
Executive Director Steves.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, we're working hard to try to ensure that we can get the review done that we need to do and get it into your docket in a timely fashion. And so, as indicated there, the comment portal will always be available. It's just that leading up to board meetings, we have to at some point say, okay, we're stopping you're going to stop taking additional comments for this particular docket and capture them all, put them in the docket, and make them available. You're correct that this will not capture those few days leading up to a board meeting. It wouldn't capture those comments, but it would capture basically everything else. So it's possible that there could be a late breaking issue that there are some additional comments coming in and we have not yet gotten them into the docket. They would certainly appear in the next docket, and I think depending on the volume, we could certainly make regents aware that there were additional comments coming in. But we're saying that we're trying to, I think, hit the mark of not over-promising what we can deliver because we just don't know how many comments we're going to be getting, what the volume is, and how long it will take us to get through them. And so that's our challenge with this, is that we want to promise something that we think we can actually deliver, and if we can do better than that, we absolutely will.
I think one item, just to clarify, that the proposed deadline in here, timeline for submission, is of what will be packaged and released for that meeting. However, people can still add comments. We may still, again, not over-promising and under-delivering, but we may, as Regent, still be able to go in and see, have additional comments been added since that deadline on an individual basis, just not in a package that's necessarily already been tagged and organized and filtered and everything like that.
Madam Chair, that's correct. And again, if it sounds like we're hedging just a little bit, we are, because we just don't know how this packaging and tagging and all of that is going to work yet. And so we're just trying to leave ourselves a little bit of wiggle room, because we want to ensure that we can deliver a high-quality product that is ready actually for prime time in the docket. And so at this point, that's how we framed it, but we absolutely will make every effort to ensure that comments are before the board in a timely fashion.
Regent Farnsworth?
Thank you, Chair Verhalen and Executive Director Steves. I'll just wrap up by saying that I appreciate the, I think, important clarifications to this understanding. It's new, this is a pilot, but also wanting to be, kind of tie up some of these loose ends, but also be really clear to the public as we move forward, you know, what some of these pieces that I think will be helpful to hopefully increase adoption and understanding of this by the university community. I am supportive of this today. I think it's moving us in the right direction. As again, no one may be surprised about, I hope to explore additional and expanded ways to increase our public engagement as a board with the public. The chair and I have discussed a variety of things in the coming months and related to this pilot as well. And so I look forward to continuing those conversations. And I will step off the floor now. Thank you.
Thank you, Regent Farnsworth. Regent Rocha?
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. This is, very interesting. I always, when you say we're the only ones doing this, it can mean a couple things. And I like the idea that we're approaching it from the standpoint that we're, cutting new paths here for organizations like ours. I especially like the flexibility that it gives people to communicate on their time, and that it will be available. And I very much appreciate the conversation that the Chair and Mr. Steves just had about how the process for how you kind of work through these things. I don't know if you should dismiss the cat message just yet. It might actually be quite helpful. But I do have a question. So in this dialogue, and I think kind of where it initially came up, and again getting public feedback and feedback from our friends in St. Paul, in the feedback process, when I look at the commitment to accountability, and one of the circles on there is direct contact, and maybe it's a matter of degree, but this is not direct contact. It ultimately is. It's indirect from the standpoint that it's through an electronic portal. And I know that part of the feedback that's come in the previous conversations, multiple members have talked about having open forum opportunities where people can come in a live setting, provide presentation. We have the budget conversation, annually, but whether there would be whether we would have the ability at whether it's every meeting, whether it's quarterly or something of that nature, to do what a lot of boards do, which is to actually have a live opportunity for people to come in. Because that experience of having a live person speaking, their ability to see the board and receiving that information and engaging seems valuable. Is there that feedback is not part of this plan as it is right now? Is that I don't know who can speak to this as to whether that's why that's not part of it. Will it be a part of us moving forward? Because September is a pretty long window as it is, but whether we would have that ability to initiate a live public comment period of some period at all board meetings, or again, like I said, quarterly, something to that nature.
Yeah, Regent Rocha, that was where this conversation within this committee started, and migrated to this public comment portal of providing this opportunity. And I think, to Regent Farnsworth's point, this is a step, and this will give us an opportunity to evaluate how this process works as the portal and interacting in that way. And then we can have further conversations in the future about the potential for sitting where Ms. Overby is and addressing this board. The very first conversation this board had around this topic was an expressed concern about those who are at other campuses located elsewhere in the world, et cetera, won't be able to sit where Ms. Overby is. And so that direct contact is still digital contact. And so we are proposing to try this as a pilot going forward, and we will continue those conversations as this goes forward, whether we're getting the information and interaction the way that we're intending it to work. And Executive Director Steves, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
Madam Chair, I think that's a good summary.
And thank you, May I, Madam Chair? So I appreciate that. Got a number of thoughts about this. One is I would ask the administration for the future budget conversations that we don't fill public slots with administrative speakers who have access to us anyway. So I was disappointed by that last time. But with respect, I think this is a wonderful augmentation of an opportunity for people to speak directly to the board. And while I do recognize that, you know, people live in the far reaches of the state, and I grew up in rural Minnesota, and I knew that if I was going to participate in things that were happening in the core city, I had to drive. But I would not have thought that the remedy for my inconvenience is to not have it for anybody. And so I still believe that there's a public appetite among public officials and among the people in the university community to have that access. And so the challenge that I find with this is, you know, I think this is really impressive, and I'm looking forward to seeing what it does. And I think we're going to find out pretty soon whether it's, you know, something where we just get massive volumes of information, and that's a good indication. We may get just a couple people, you know, from time to time, probably going to be issue-oriented and so on as to whether people are taking advantage of it. But what I'm concerned about is that I think we should have a pilot effort at allowing public comment on a more routine basis and an in-person basis. And so while I'm supportive of this, by supporting this in its form would have somewhat of the impact of expressing a disinterest in having the live public input. And so I don't know if it would be something that, and I'm not really exactly sure what we're voting on, because, you know, we're, I guess, in placing, I don't know if it's under the primary, the primary guidelines or what exactly we're, but I would seek to amend the resolution to add a pilot live forum opportunity on a trial basis, and I would start quarterly. And if, now kind of speaking to that, if it's something where we have a very high volume, you know, you got 40 people trying for 8 slots and you know, we're having to turn a lot of people away, then maybe we should go on a month-to-month basis. But at least starting out with that opportunity to see what the interest is, what that prospect is, and then that would again be augmented by access for all people who wouldn't necessarily be available to or comfortable with coming in. So I guess that would come in the form of a motion to amend to include a quarterly live opportunity to present to the board. And then the conditions of that, I think, you know, the board office can put something together for the board.
So is that a formal motion, or can I comment before you make your motion? Would you allow me to comment before you officially?
I would turn to my 2 parliamentary experts in the room as to whether, I would certainly grant you the courtesy that if you want to speak to it before I would move it specifically.
So one of the principles when you're proposing something new is to be able to evaluate changes in isolation to see what is working and what's not working. And I would suggest that this body, we've spent the last 4 meetings, months, more months, but the last 4 meetings, developing this proposal and this pilot program that interacts in this way, and I would ask that instead of doing any sort of amendment right now, which then creates the two-option approach, that we move forward with this pilot program as it's been proposed and developed by this committee. And then as we move through the process and pilot program, we can have more of these conversations about interaction and how it's working and what we're learning from this, and whether we should be making additional augmentations to it to evaluate other pieces and other steps that can be taken.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I appreciate that. I see it very differently. I see it, I see this as an augmentation of what I think fundamentally we should have. I think we should fundamentally have the opportunity for that live presentation. It's valuable to people. It's very valuable to the public to have that. And I don't, even at its highest use in this plan, I have been consistent in saying that's something that I believe that's what we need. And I have been patient, in previous requests saying, well, let us try to develop something that's comprehensive, albeit, but the very thing that I was asking for is not a part of it. And so from that standpoint, I don't want this to substitute for what I think was the fundamental request in the first instance. At least that was the case for me. And so I would interpose my motion to amend, and certainly the body has the opportunity to discuss it, and everybody can have their opinion, and I will be on record as to my preference for that opportunity. I don't see it as an either-or, and I don't think that this inhibits or in any way harms the very good work that's here. But as it stands right now, this would appear to be a substitute for the very thing that is the principle that I was pursuing in the first instance, along with, I think, other members of the board. So very much appreciate your comments. I just see it differently. So I would move the amendment.
And so what is your amendment?
Amendment would be to, in addition to the proposal, in addition to the directive that's before us, again, which I'm not entirely clear on what the language of it is, that the board would commence with a quarterly open forum opportunity for the public with the details to be established through the board office.
All right, is there a second?
Second.
All right, so discussion on the amendment. I've said my piece. Regent Mayeron.
I'm going to oppose the amendment. I like the idea of doing these programs separately and being able to address the effectiveness of them separately, and it doesn't preclude us, once we make a decision about this pilot program, with entertaining other means of communication and perhaps running other pilot programs. But I'm very concerned that one will muddle the other and we won't have good data to assess the individual pilot programs. So I will oppose the amendment.
Regent Tad Johnson.
Wherever I go, I get this question about, how does the public communicate with the board? And I think what Regent Rocha is talking about is what folks are interested in. I recognize that we've taken several steps forward on trying to get there. I'm just wondering if we could postpone that idea while staff works on it a little bit, what a pilot project would look like if we're for direct comment. I don't want to, I guess I'd like to know what that looks like before I vote on it. It sounds a little, it's a little vague right now.
Regent Farnsworth.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen, and I just wanted to speak briefly to this, and reflect briefly. This is, I think as everyone knows, this is where I started with this.
It was your resolution.
Yes, it was. And so, I am not going to not support what I still believe is valuable in terms of, in quarterly, I think is a reasonable start. This engagement opportunity, to Regent Tad Johnson's point, I also hear about this very frequently. And so in full transparency, I was going to bring something like this forward. Similarly, I chose not to, but I'm still at the heart of my value of how I view our public governance role. I'm supportive of this idea, so I just wanted to explain why I seconded this and why I support it. I do think you can do both, at the same time, but I also understand, if I don't know where the votes are going to be on this, but I stand by everything that I said in the previous discussion in terms of supporting the pilot program, the conversations that you and I have had, Chair Verhalen and whatnot. So I wanted to explain why I seconded this, so thank you.
Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I don't dispute the need for public comment, but I also would like to see the full picture of how that rolls out. I think the pilot that we have currently is more of an equal access at this point because there are so many people in greater Minnesota who wish to comment that are not able to come in physically. And so it kind of lays an even playing field for input. Thank you.
All right, Regent Kenyanya and then Regent Powell. He beat you by a second.
Okay, all right. I was reserving a spot. The thought was still coming. But no, I mean, I'm kind of where Regent Tad Johnson is, in that I'm supportive of it, and I think people want that, and we've discussed this a bit before, but the chair of the committee and I actually talked about this the other week, and I think it's a good opportunity, but there are kind of legitimate concerns. I mean, if anyone's seen what's happened with school boards and whatnot around, and I'm not saying that as a reason to not doing this. I'm saying it as a reason to be kind of like thoughtful and whatnot. I think I don't know if it's a middle ground, and I don't know what the appetite of the committee would be, rather than to add the 4 quarterly forums in this resolution would be to add a directive to explore that and design that or to add that to the committee work plan and have that discussion. But I don't know, that's not a formal motion. I'm putting it out there for reaction.
Regent Powell.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. This will be repetitive, so I'll be brief, but what's compelling to me about the proposal that our team have developed is it provides tremendous access. It's very easy to use in a variety of formats, including video, written, and audio. And by the way, we live in a Zoom era, and so people are increasingly, that's how work gets done. So it's very timely. It provides tremendous access anytime, anywhere. I mean, we're going to get comments and videos that people did at 11 o'clock at night because that's when they had the time to do it. And so, to me, it's a tremendously accessible way to reach the board, and I really like it. Whereas face-to-face is going to be highly limited by geography, by the time that we would have available to do it. I mean, we get, I think, maybe 10 people. And my guess is that over 99% of our comments, over 99% are going to come through this portal. So I really like this idea. I think we should focus on the pilot and developing this idea now. And if we want to come back later and look at public, we can do it. But I just think that this has so much merit and strength and is so good for the public that we should focus on this one now. And I won't vote for the amendment.
Regent Tauyarabe.
Sorry, thank you. Chair Verhalen and Director Seeves and Ms. Overby, thank you for your hard work on this. I mean, I think that we put the request before you, and I'm really happy to see where we've landed. I think that it's a really good opportunity to explore a new way of engagement, and I do believe that it is going to generate more significant engagement with this board. And so for that reason, I feel like that's a really good start. I do want to note that I think, as others have said, I'm not ready to kind of vote on the proposed amendment because I'm not quite sure what that involves. But I think that it's an important point, which is where are there opportunities for greater engagement? And I don't know that it's necessarily, when I've been out in community, I don't know that it's necessarily been about being presenting to the board, but but more about our own engagement with the various stakeholders as well. And so I think for that reason, I just don't think there's enough there to think about that. But I do think it's something to think about because it is an important opportunity. And obviously being able to be in person is different, but I don't think there's enough there today to talk about it. And I really am excited that we've gotten to the point to offer ways for the public to engage more intentionally with us on board matters.
All right, Regent Rocha, and then we'll vote.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. I kind of, the initial request was, it was different than what we have kind of reminded of when I was 12, and I asked my parents if I could get a motorcycle, and said, Mom and Dad will talk about it, and they came back and came up with a riding lawnmower. And I said, well, wait, it's not a motorcycle. Well, let's give the lawnmower a chance. I'm just kidding. I don't want to diminish what the value of this is, but this is just different than what we were initially talking about. And to the very sound comments by my colleagues, with respect to Regent Mayron, and talked about, and Regent Davenport about, let's see how this goes. My preference would have been, let's put forward a public comment, an in-person public comment opportunity, and then see how it goes. And then obviously if there would have been a dramatic number of people that weren't having access, then developing an additional portal, which I think is a very good thing as it is. I would also note that the distance issue, we do live in a Zoom world, and we could very easily provide some opportunities for people while there are people speaking live that we also could have, just as we just had one of our colleagues speaking to us through Zoom. People could also present through Zoom, and that would obviously take care of you don't have the three-dimensional effect, but it takes care of that distance issue. So I think that directing to put forward a quarterly opportunity for people to be in person, in addition to what I think is a very good and novel opportunity for people to provide input, I think it makes sense. I think it's consistent with the original request that led to the development of this, and so I would ask people to support it. Thank you.
All right.
And I would ask for a roll call vote.
Before we take the roll call vote, I would, just on one item you raised, Regent Rocha, remind this body that when we started this conversation, OBR gave us a presentation on the logistics of even having one regent, let alone a lot of members of the public, join us via Zoom for this, because it is not a direct stream. There are a lot of background connections that need to be made to make that happen. And we have all seen the TV interview where someone expects to be able to speak and their audio suddenly doesn't work. And so it is not just as simple as a plug and play, and there are logistics that would need to go into that. And so with that, Ms. Dirksen, please go ahead.
On the Rocha amendment, Regent Davenport.
No.
Regent Davenport votes no. Regent Farnsworth.
Yes.
Regent Farnsworth votes yes. Regent Hipsch.
No.
Regent Hipsch votes no. Regent Ruth Johnson.
No.
Regent Ruth Johnson votes no. Regent Tad Johnson.
No.
Regent Tad Johnson votes no. Regent Kenyanya.
Yes.
Regent Kenyanya votes yes. Regent Mayron.
No.
Regent Mayron votes no. Regent Powell.
No.
Regent Powell votes no. Regent Rocha.
Yes.
Regent Rocha votes yes. Regent Swigum.
No.
Regent Swigum votes no. Regent Taurabe.
No.
Regent Taurabe votes no. Regent Verhalen.
No.
Regent Verhalen votes no. Madam Chair, there are 3 yeses and 9 noes.
Right, so the Rocha amendment does not, the Rocha amendment fails. So going back to the main motion, I have Regents Davenport, Kenyanya, and Tad Johnson to speak. So to the original, to the approval to direct the Office of the Board of Regents to implement the proposed public comment portal pilot program as presented.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen, and I'll have a quick comment, and it's now kind of postscript to the conversation about timeliness for public knowing what's on the agenda and that kind of thing. And it's just a reminder to us that one of our tools for the public is our annual work plan. And so those are posted, and citizens can look at that and know what's coming for the year, and then follow up as things come out. Thank you.
Yeah. Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, just want to offer thanks, obviously, to the, committee staff and leadership for the work, but then also to colleagues for open-mindedness, to the subject. Just trying to reflect back on the first conversation we had, and I think we have made progress and come a certain way. I do hope to, in the future, consider in person. I mean, with, all the caveats that have been said are true, but there's something about, yesterday I was virtual, but I received a welfare check essentially from one of my colleagues. I chaired a whole meeting, but there's something about not being here. I think we know the value of that. The timeline question that Regent Farnsworth brought up is important, and everything Mr. Steve says makes sense, especially in the pilot. You don't know how much work is going to be needed there to kind of prime them. So I certainly understand that, but I do think, if the deadline's that Friday and the docket releases the day before, I mean, that's not a ton of time. With that being said, this is another example of why it is important for the board to follow the review 1 month, action the next month format, because then even if the docket just came out, the public did have the last month to know that the thing was there. So that's just another highlight of why that's important. But no, I mean, I think this is great. I mean, and reading we're developing this software, right? This platform, so in the legacy of Regent Emeritus Simonson, we have to commercialize this really and sell it to our Big Ten peers and whatnot. And no, but I mean, I hope they copy it. It's a good idea. But Regent Powell did whisper to me that he hopes to see VR added in future iterations.
Very good. The docket materials do come out the week ahead of our meetings. The agendas are even a week before that. So there's at least somewhat of a heads up, at least, to what our agenda will look like for the public. And then the docket materials, as you said, do come out the week before our meetings.
And clarification, this is the next day that we're talking about the deadline, correct?
So the agenda would come out 2 weeks ahead of our meeting, docket materials a week before our meeting.
Okay.
Yes.
Right.
Regent Ted Johnson.
Thank you. I think this is a very good step forward, and I thank the staff and the staff is creating a lot of extra work for itself, I think, on doing all this. So commend their efforts. And as I was saying earlier, everywhere I go, I get the question about public comments and how do we do it better. And I think what Regent Rocha and I have seen in other forms of government are, periods where regular folks come in live. I realized the difficulties of that, and staff took that into account as developing this. So I think this is a great pilot project, and I'm going to vote for it, certainly. But I do hope we can get a little closer to that vision of communicating more closely with students and other folks that want to communicate with us. Thank you.
Thank you. There being no further discussion on this item, thank you all for your thoughtful participation. All those in favor of the, not going to try and say it again. Main motion, thank you. Please say aye. Aye. All those opposed say no. The motion is approved. Thank you very much, Ms. Overby and Executive Director Steves, for all of the groundwork on this. And Ms. Flotten, who we know started us out here, and Ms. Overby, you expertly took it over, so thank you. Our next item is reviewing the proposed off-cycle amendments to Board of Regents policy namings and renamings. Here to walk us through those amendments are Controller Sue Paulson and Jason Langworthy, Policy Manager and Assistant Secretary. Mr. Langworthy, please start us. Will you please start us off on this item?
Chair Verhalen, members of the committee, good morning. Nothing says policy fun like clarifying definitions. And that's what we're here to do this morning. So you'll recall last February, you approved significant amendments to Board of Regents policy namings and renamings. They were extensive, and it had taken quite a bit of time to arrive at those definitions. When they came before you for action, there were some questions regarding the existing definitions in the policy relating to gift and sponsorship, and if there was enough difference between the two, given the way that the policy uses those. Instead of delaying the policy at that time, you asked for those definitions to come back at a later time, and during committee work planning, we slotted it in here in February. So working with the Controller's Office, the University of Minnesota Foundation, our friends in the Office of the General Counsel, we bring you these proposed off-cycle amendments, and Controller Paulson is here to walk you through the rationale for those.
Great, thank you, Controller Paulson.
Chair Verhalen, committee members, the off-cycle review of these definitions, as Mr. Langworthy presented, was directly a result of the request of the committee. And we believe that these revised definitions are in alignment with continued IRS donation regulations and meet the spirit of the questions that were asked and the comments that were raised at the February 2022 meeting. To summarize, we're making 3 definitional changes, and to summarize those definitional changes to the specific Board of Regents policy namings and renamings, we're making clear that a gift is a contribution made by a donor where the donor will not receive any direct economic benefit or tangible compensation. We're also changing the sponsorship the sponsorship definition itself to be that exact thing, that the sponsor does anticipate and expect some sort of economic benefit. And then a minor change to the definition of sponsor. And again, we believe that these changes are in alignment with the IRS donation regulation. So I'm going to ask you to turn to page 17 of the docket materials themselves. And I'm going to walk you word by word through the definitions themselves. And as Mr. Langworthy said, nothing more exciting than definitions. So section 3 definitions, specifically subdivision 3, gift. Gift shall mean a contribution made by a donor, individual or organization, for the benefit of the university to be used in accordance with donor intent. Gifts are transfers of money or property, equipment, land, etc., for which the donor will not receive a direct economic benefit or any other tangible compensation, goods or services. Subdivision 4, sponsor. Sponsor shall mean a party to a sponsorship agreement. Subdivision 5, sponsorship. Sponsorship shall mean a contract with a trade or business involving the provision of funds or other support with the expectation of returned economic benefit. Chair Verhalen, that kind of summarizes the language changes, and Mr. Langworthy and I are interested in comments and feedbacks and questions from the committee.
Sure, so for the committee's refresh on this is for review. We're not seeking any action today. One question I had, and this is semantics, but you put it in front of me, Mr. Langworthy, so I'm going to ask. Given that the definition of sponsorship is that it shall mean a contract with a trade or business involving the provision of funds, but subdivision 4 says sponsor shall mean a party to a sponsorship agreement. In essence, doesn't it now read that sponsor shall mean a party to a sponsorship contract agreement because of how sponsorship is defined as a contract or agreement? Something for consideration as you look it over. Regent Hipsch.
Thanks, Chair Verhalen. And I kind of had a similar question. Going beyond that, so if somebody endows a chair, is that a gift or a sponsorship? If an individual endows a chair, is that a gift or a sponsorship? I think I think the people that are giving the money want it to be a gift, not a sponsorship, but they still want their name on the endowed chair.
Chair Verhalen, Committee Member Hipsch, as we always look at these individual situations, it always depends on the facts and circumstances of the arrangement. So the policy itself talks about a review of the namings, and at the same time, behind the scenes, review of the facts and circumstances of that agreement is being conducted to ensure that it is either truly a gift in alignment with IRS regulations, or it's something else. And if it's something else, then we're evaluating that to determine whether that is a gift-eligible activity or not.
And I would add, Chair Verhalen, Regent Hipsch, that's why adding donor intent into gift, right? What is the intent? Is the intent a charitable donation, or is the intent a sponsorship where then that person has an expectation that they are receiving a returned economic benefit? That would help that determination.
Okay.
Anything further?
I'm still a little more confused than I was, because still, by the definition, they would be a sponsor no matter what. I mean, because if their name is on the endowment, right?
Well, I think that's worth consideration, but the reading as it's stated is the sponsorship has to have the donor expectation of returned economic benefit. So is there an economic benefit to an endowed chair? And I would argue not, in a general sense. Mr. Langworthy.
And the other thing I would note, Chair Verhalen, Regent Hipsch, Section 5, right, the way that the policy is structured, Section 4 deals with honorary namings. Section 5 deals with namings associated with gifts or sponsorships, right? And so if you are making that either a gift or a sponsorship, it would fall under Section 5. The clarification here then is, how is it treated? Is it treated with a direct economic benefit or not? Does it meet IRS definitions or not? So for the purposes of the policy is really bifurcated between honorary namings, which we give in honor of service, or for other reasons defined, and then other namings associated with gifts or sponsorships.
That answers my question.
All right. But yes, please do keep thinking through that as we take this to the next meeting. Regent Mayron.
Yes, again, here we go, word scrivening, which I'd be happy to provide otherwise, but looking at subdivision 5, this is, I think, would clarify a couple things where it says sponsorship shall mean a contract with a trade or business involving the provision of funds or other support. I think we should add the language to the university with the expectation of returned economic benefit to the trade or business, so that it's clear who it's supporting and it's clear who it's explicit as to whom the economic benefit is for. That's my only scrivening suggestion at this time.
Thank you, Regent Mayron. Regent Rocha.
Thank you, Chair Verhalen. Jumping into the scrivening pool, I think to the chair's original point, as the old one just went into sponsorship, and then subdivision 5 is titled sponsorship, I think perhaps if you just added agreement to sponsorship agreement, I think that covers that concern. But there's also kind of different, I'm sort of got some of the same questions with respect to Regent Hip's questions. In 3, we define it as direct economic benefit, but in 5, it just says returned economic benefit. And so direct versus indirect, because one of the things I'm considering is it's like, you know, if Acme Corporation provides money to be placed on the floor of the basketball court, or versus the Acme Corporation chair in such and such, they both have, you know, there's a positive public demonstration, or there's essentially a marketing value. One obviously reaches a lot more people and so on, but so trying to understand, you know, because ultimately I don't think there's going to be a bright line where somebody is doing it because they want to support a certain kind of research for the benefit of society through the university versus doing it because their name is on it. So that was the one thing that, as I was reading these, it's like, well, when we talk about return economic benefit, direct economic benefit, you know, do we recognize in sponsorship that it's, you know, marketing constitutes that? That would be helpful to understand that distinction between gift and sponsorship, because if I'm not mistaken, we do have corporate gifts that end up with corporate namings. And to some extent, maybe it doesn't even matter to them so much because they can either write it off as a marketing expense or as a philanthropic contribution. But that, just defining the difference between a gift and a sponsorship, I think would help. The only other question I would have is using IEs and et ceteras. And I don't know if that has a, you know, kind of creates, you know, it's almost like an included but not limited to language as to how that is, if that's the standard that we're using throughout our policy, and I haven't had a chance to go back and look to see, so be it, but otherwise maybe being clearer what that means. So otherwise, oftentimes people look at it and they'll think that those are the only items that fall into that category, and clearly this is just trying to give us an example. So those would be my only comments, Madam Chair.
So clarifying whether it's inclusive or exclusive.
Sure.
Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Right. I think we've given you lots of suggestions for your words.
Thank you.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate it. There being no additional business before this committee, we stand adjourned until 9:25.